what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh. Leadership GPS. Insightful conversations about leadership and what it takes to be successful in today's rapidly changing organizations.
Hello and welcome to Leadership GPS. This is our discussion show here on themesh.tv where we talk about leadership development, we talk about leadership practices and ideas, things to help those that either are currently in leadership positions to be stronger leaders, or maybe someone who's looking to grow in their organization or in their role and become a future leader. With me, my partner in crime, my cohort, my father, Tony Jackson.
Hey, son. How you doing?
Good. How you doing?
I'm good. Yeah.
Dad, while we're sitting here together,
yes.
The father-son thing, being the day that it is today, I feel like we'd be remiss if we didn't mention my mother's birthday, your wife's birthday. With us just being right here on the same table, it seems kind of odd that we wouldn't at least mention it and give her an online shout out for her birthday. You did remember it was her birthday,
shoot.
Right?
It's her birthday today. Are you serious?
Yes. All right. So all of the internet community help remind my father that today is my mother's birthday. So.
Actually, I do remember. She is now officially as old as I am.
Yes.
I had her beat by 30 days exactly, and she plays that 30 days up just enormously over the years as being younger than me, that 30-day period. So now we're on par level. She's just as old and decrepit and achy as I am.
Oh, boy. I know. Just for the record, that was Tony saying that, not me. I think my mother's still very young-looking and vibrant and as ever. So,
well, I do, too. She's young-looking, she's pretty and vivacious, but she's achy.
All right, achy maybe. Yes.
I see that side.
All right. Well, happy birthday, Mom. So I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. So, all right. So, Dad, I guess talking about it's probably a good segue. Talking about my mother,
yes.
Someone who's very, very likable.
Yes.
So now we're getting to a question talking about likability when it comes to leadership. And this is a question I know you and I have had some offline conversations about it. And I know it's something we tend to struggle with a little bit. And I think you work with probably some people where you have to deal with this and work with them on this issue as well.
A lot, yeah.
You think about great leaders, you think about people you've always heard of, there's always that old adage that it's more important to be respected than it is to be liked.
As a leader, you're talking.
As a leader.
Yeah.
Some of the best leaders are people that, were not really well liked, but they were well respected for what they did. But we've kind of come into a culture now where I think the whole likability thing is probably a little more supercharged. I think people are a little more aware of leaders wanting or feeling like they should be likable. So my question to you, because you do work with a lot of people on developing leadership skills, do you think it's more important to be respected than liked, or is the likability still something that has to be in the mix as well?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's all for Leadership GPS. Tune in next time.
Let me tell you, this has plagued me lately, Alan, and I know we selected this topic, which we're calling leadership and the other L word, the likability. And it's plagued me recently because I've always been an adherent of the fact that, it's better to be respected than liked as a leader, because too much likability tends to curry favor with people, and you make decisions on what you think might be best only for them rather than where the goal is and the mission is that you need to get to and those types of things. And sometimes it causes you to play favorites and all sorts of things. I'm not talking about leadership on the national level, military leadership, football teams, or anything. I'm talking about day-to-day practical leadership with people right up against you, visible all day long, that you work with in a department or in an organization or a company. Okay? That's what we're talking about.
Sure.
That's real leadership. And a good leader is a person who moves others to be different, think differently, act differently.
Right.
Hopefully in a positive direction towards a common goal, set of values, whatever it might be. Okay. And if those things don't happen, then it's not a good leader. Now, let's back up. Let me tell you about a couple examples that I've run into just recently in my individual practice of leadership consultation. Okay. And by the way, I think I need to clarify for you and the audience out there that I try to minimize, or if ever, use the word leadership when I'm talking about this context that I am now about leadership consultation. I try to not to use the word leadership coach. Right? Coach to me is a very, very valuable position to hold and helpful. But you know what? It's not for the guy from the outside that pops in and talks to people every now and then to be a coach. That's somebody on the sidelines every day watching the plays develop, being able to pull the players off to the side and say, okay, good, but or let's try this. That didn't work. Why did you do that? And seeing the action unfold every day. That's kind of the one-up leader's position in an organization, supervising the work of another leader at another level.
Okay.
That's coaching. And that's what it should be. Most people don't do it, quite honestly. They coach by default, and it's usually disciplinary, and that's not a good thing. But so I'll use the term consultations, and that's what I typically do with people is people who want to grow in their leadership skills, who are new to a new leadership position or that organization as a leader, or sometimes who have gotten off track. It's kind of a rehab case. Those are the people that I work with from time to time about leadership consultations. Okay?
Sure. Got it.
Now, a couple of those that I've run into just recently have kept me awake at night.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example, one just mostly really because it's fresh on my mind. There's a person in an organization, fairly good sized organization, who has been charged with changing the culture, shifting the culture of another organization, a kind of a subset of the large organization, another facility, from where it's been, a very traditional organization delivering the type of service and care that it has for years, the way it has, but has not modernized itself in terms of delivery of service, delivery of care. And this person's been brought in because of a rich history of doing just that and a strong history of competency in her background and her technical skills and basically to do what's needed to be done in this organization.
Okay. Brought in with a real specific purpose to help bring this culture
That's right.
along. And okay.
And it was acknowledged to everybody in the organization, and she was given a position to do that. She's full-time doing this. She's in a assistant director type of administrator role. And right now she's extraordinarily frustrated, as are the people in that organization she's trying to move along. Okay? They're changing dynamics, they're changing systems, they're changing expectations, they're changing the culture over time. And she's right on track to do that. And yet what's getting in the way right now and what's causing that not to happen is that people are resisting something about this whole process. The first thing we thought about was, well, maybe they're resisting the fact that they just don't want to change. They don't want to let go of what I've been doing the way we've been doing it for all these years. It's a common complaint we hear about.
Typical challenge a lot of people face, absolutely.
But you know what? The picture, the end goal, the picture, the vision that's out there for what this organization is to transform itself into over time, in fact, over the next couple of years, is absolutely very positive, very alluring. And when you talk to the staff in that organization or the other managers in that organization, they said, oh, yeah, I have no problem with that. Okay?
So they see the end goal, they like the end goal, but it's the whole getting from A to B, the change process, maybe rubbing some people wrong.
Maybe, but not really. That's what we found out.
All right.
That's what we thought might be the case. Just letting go of what has been, okay? And that's something we run into frequently. But what we have found out lately is that it's not the process of change towards that good goal, that good vision down the road that people are resisting. It's the person who's asking them to make those changes. And in fact, when I interviewed one person, and I said, what's getting in their way? Why are you going to human resources to complain about things about this topic? In fact, there's a whole petition written. A lot of people marched to HR about this. And this one person simply said, I don't like her. We don't like her. And the person they were talking about was this person charged with moving them as an organization.
So the person's brought in with a specific task and a specific skill set that's really geared for where the organization wants to go. Trying to do something within the organization, but now people are resisting not because of what they're trying to get done. It's because they just don't like the person.
In this case, yes.
Right.
And they were very articulate about that. And you know what? I believe them. Because if you're around this person, this quasi-leader that's been charged with this long enough, there are some behaviors that this person exhibits that's hard to like. Okay? So it raises this whole question about what is important in terms of moving an organization forward, accomplishing its goals, getting on track and getting aligned with its values and vision, or just simply shifting a culture. What is it that really is most important? Well, I've done some research, and there's some studies that have been done about this whole issue of likability and leadership.
All right.
I'm coming to the conclusion that I'm not sure it's really possible to be a good leader, positive leader, the way I define it, without having some degree of likability by most of the people that you're trying to work with.
Okay. So you're saying you think your personal belief right now is there's got to be some level of likability. Doesn't have to be 100%.
That's right.
And it doesn't have to be to every single person in your team, every single attribute,
right.
but there's got to be some ounce of likability.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Mainly because, if we use the maxim that leadership is influencing people to move in a direction from where they are now.
Right.
And hopefully that's a positive direction. In this particular example I'm talking about, it's towards this transformation of this culture, all right, to a totally different type of organizational structure. And I've never found it to be true that a person is able to influence people positively, where they have a choice to be influenced or not, right, to comply or not, without some degree of likability. Now, it might be that degree of likability is just simply tolerance. You're not presenting to me anything I dislike, that I hate. It's just okay. You don't get my
absence of dislike. Maybe could be just as tolerable as whether I really like the person.
That's exactly right. In other words, it's what do our behaviors as a likable or unlikable person get in the way of the processes we're trying to make happen?
Are there certain? To me, likability is such a broad term as well. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could define whether you like somebody. I mean, it's such a broad term to use anyway. Are there specific attributes or things that you feel like really contribute the most to that likability factor? I mean, what is it when we say we like somebody, especially in a leadership position? What is it we're talking about most of the time?
Let me give you a whole slew of things, but in two categories, first of all, right?
Okay.
Now, you tell me what's not to like about these terms, first of all, as I read them out. I'm going to read them out, and you interrupt me at any point and say, oh, no, I don't like that at all.
Okay.
I dare you.
All right.
Kindness.
Nope, I don't like kindness.
Get out of here. Okay. Kindness, infectious smile, sense of humor,
Okay.
easygoing, easy to talk with, makes you feel good,
Okay.
genuine, warm, honest, inviting, authentic, believable, humble, good listener, great ideas, open, responsive, respectful, positive, polite.
Sure. Those are all
What?
really nice, great attributes. I mean, I think any one of those is something somebody would relate to and appreciate and enjoy.
Can you think of anybody other than your dad who has all those traits?
Well, I mean, and me. But go ahead.
Yeah, and his sky on there. Yeah, that's right.
But anybody besides the two of us that has all those traits?
Yeah, no, we have to search. Okay,
not offhand.
just the two of us. That's right. All right, but I'm not finished. I just gave you the first category.
Okay, sure.
Right? Now, but when you really drill down and start looking at what makes a difference as likability person, or as a person who's liked in a workplace, it boils down to about 4 components. Okay, really, this is the components of likability that affect positive outcomes in a workplace. Okay, I think anyway.
Sure.
And this has been replicated by others. It's not original thinking on my part. Friendliness, which encompasses a lot of those other
A lot of those characteristics
right?
kind of group into there.
Realness.
Yeah,
Authenticity of the
not
person.
Fake, not coming off as plasticky or kind of giving canned responses on everything.
Yeah, and that's, the person I was working with just recently, the leader who was struggling with this whole issue. When I talked to her and said, you know what, you really need to work to get some more likability in your presence in the organization. She said, what? I have to get them to like me? I said, how can I do that with being phony about it? And we had to work on that,
Yeah.
Because for her to become all suddenly likable, it will be phony.
Sure.
So it's got to be a repetition of likable behaviors over a period of time for people to believe you. All right?
Okay.
So friendliness and realness or authenticity. The third one is empathy. This is where a leader needs to not be apart from the people they're trying to lead, but a part of the people.
Well, that one right away, that stands out probably the most of the 3 you've read so far. I mean, to me, I almost feel like you could do away with the friendliness to some degree. The friendliness could be a little minimized if you knew that the empathy was there.
Yeah.
You can be a somewhat cold, not as verbal, not as humorous person, but as long as you can show empathy to your employees, I think that probably jumps out more.
And empathy to me is not a soppy term. It is not.
No.
It's not just dripping with goodness, all right, type of thing. But empathy to me means kind of getting in their skin. It really means insightful into the person.
Sure.
Understanding where they're coming from and why they're coming from there.
Right.
It means also, though, remembering to do the nice things towards a person that you're being empathetic with. For example, not so recently, but memorable, I worked with a person one time who was just, even in the session I had with this guy, he came in and he was just in a foul mood. I mean, it was just almost brittle, and this is not like him. And I finally confronted him with it. I said, George, I call him George, because that was his name. But I said, George, I said, what's going on with you? He said, nothing I need to get into. It's not even work related. I said, that's fine. What's happening? Because you're not yourself this morning. And I'm sure this is showing to your staff.
Yeah.
He just laughed. He said, yeah, I know it is. They've already told me. But they're coming to say, so what's wrong with you today?
Yeah.
That type of thing. And the word spreads around, don't get near him today. All right. And he happened to tell me that he had just found out that his spouse had cancer. Mm-hmm. And he was still in that anger stage,
Sure.
and just ticked off about it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he was carrying that around. Well, things changed at that point. All of a sudden, getting from the standpoint of a consultant to him saying, okay, but the behaviors you're exhibiting are not good as a leader and so on. So get over it. Can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
To be
it's kind of out the
empathetic, I have to say,
window.
oh my gosh, George.
Right.
I understand, How
kind
could
of-
you feel any other way?
It's putting priorities in the right place
That's
when
exactly
there's
right.
more of a human issue involved.
That's
So,
exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's knowing, even on a day-to-day basis, somebody who seems a little distracted on their job at work, it might be because they have a sick child at home and they
Sure.
don't know how to balance that. you
Right.
know? But just brushing it over and say, okay, well, it should be better tomorrow, whatever. That type of thing. It's not being empathetic.
Well, and I tend to think too, or we're talking about this empathetic aspect here. If you think about leaders many, many years down the road, you think about old bosses, past leaders that you've had.
Yeah.
I guarantee you, someone who has a good smile and a good sense of humor, that's nice. But what you're going to remember about a good boss is that they actually sat down and showed me that they cared about a personal situation I was going through, or they listened or were helpful in that area.
Yep.
I think that's really just going to stand out more. And I think somebody can look back and say, I liked that boss because of that.
And they probably didn't judge you. You didn't have the sense that they were judging you because
Right.
you had that going on in your
Sure.
life or whatever.
So, the empathy thing, I think of the three you've mentioned,
Yeah.
that's definitely the one that jumps out the most at me.
Well, just to kind of wrap that up about empathy, Maya Angelou, the great poet, and wonderful author and everything, once said, and I know this has been heard by a lot of people, she said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Yep, that's right.
Okay? That's a likability thing. That's empathetic. Now, the fourth one, I have to mention the fourth one.
Oh,
Going to-
sure, yeah.
Okay. And that's the realness. All right? Realness. Let me highlight.
I thought we already mentioned realness.
Did we really?
Yeah, I think realness was number 2.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, on your list, let me get back to my other
yeah,
list.
let's-
Relevance.
Relevance,
I knew
there
it was
we
an
go.
R word.
Yes.
Okay. Friendliness, realness, empathy, and relevance. All right?
All right, so explain relevance to me. I don't understand that one.
Well, relevance is your ability, a leader's ability to connect with people's interests and wants, needs, desires, whatever, outside their own. Relevant. I'm making my words to you relevant to where you are and where you're coming
So
from.
instead
It's
of just
almost like
talking,
empathetic.
instead of talking globally about something,
That's
it's
right.
being able to relate something to a person.
Absolutely.
Say, okay, this is how this affects your job.
Yep.
This is how you can play a role in this,
That's right.
this project.
That's right.
Okay, got it.
It's very much like understanding the dynamics of change. When you try to evoke change, people. I was once asked not too long ago by a wonderful leader of a large company in our area to make a speech to their several hundred employees at their annual employee meeting. And I asked her, I said, okay, great. I'd be happy to do that. I'd like to be on stage. And what do you want me to talk about? And she said, embracing change. That's why I'm not going to talk about that. And she was incredulous about it. And she said, why not? I said, because I don't think all the change that you want people to embrace is embraceable. I said, let me talk about how you tolerate change and live through it. All right. So what I did during that point, I made a lot of my remarks to the leadership of this organization in the earshot of all these hundreds of employees out there. And I told the leaders, I said, if you're asking these hundreds of people over here to change the way they do their job, something they've gotten competent at, feel good about, capable of doing all this sort of stuff. I said, remember, you've always got to answer 2 questions up front in order for people to wrap their arms around that change and not necessarily embrace it, but to tolerate it and change well. Okay. And those 2 questions were why and how. Now, the why is understandable. Why do we have to change? Why is this necessary? Why is this being done? But the how it takes a little explanation. You have to explain to people how this is going to affect you personally and how it's going to look when it all gets in place. Okay? That how it's going to affect you is, to me, creating a sense of relevance. It's saying, I know where you're coming from. I know what you're thinking. I know where you're coming from. Let me plug it into that. Let me plug into that. Okay? That's relevance. That's relevance. And you get that by being in contact with people a lot, by sharing mutual interests, and valuing that person for them as the person as well as a performer. Okay?
Sure, right.
That's where you get relevance from.
So looking back at those 4 kind of categories of the likeness, I guess, help refresh my memory. I know we've got realness.
Yep.
We've got empathy.
Yep.
We've got relevance.
Yep.
And then the first one was
Friendliness.
That's
The
right.
overall
Friendliness.
friendliness, yeah.
Okay. So
That's
those 4 kind of categories, a lot of people, when they hear the word likability or they think more about the friendliness side. That's
Yep.
the one that stands out more because it's more the visual. It's more the smiles, the sense of humor, the hey buddy, slap you on the back type of thing. But we're saying that's just one element of likability. You can still be likable even if you may not be the friendliest person in the
Overly
world.
friendly. That's right.
As long as you're empathetic
Yep.
and can make it relevant to what we're talking about and not be fake.
Well, see,
People see
here's
that as
the deal.
avoidance.
I would be proud to have, if I'm in a leadership position, to have people that report to me like my directness, like the fact that they know I'm going to never just shoot them a line to look good in their eyes. I'm going to tell it like it is. I want them to know exactly where I'm coming from. I want them to appreciate and like the fact that I'm the type of person that will say, I want to help you be successful in your work, but you're not right now.
Right.
And I want you to get on track, and I want you to be, I want to be a part of that. Okay, because I think that's a likable set of statements or behaviors, that type of thing. But not that they're always liked in terms of I'm hearing it. I don't like to be told that I'm not doing my job, but I like the way that you do it.
Sure.
All right.
Right.
Like my
they don't
behaviors.
have to like the words coming out of the mouth.
That's right.
It's just as long as it's being told directly.
That's right.
Honestly, and it's the kind of feedback they need to have to improve.
That's right.
That's good.
I'm working with another manager in another organization, totally different organization, but she is so focused on her own likability and friendliness that it paralyzes her in order to make good, healthy decisions with her people that work for her. She apologizes if she has to say something critical to an employee. She apologizes if she approaches somebody and say, could you do such and such? And they say, I really can't get to it. And she said, well, okay, don't worry about it. I know you're busy. I'll do it for you. Yeah. She's more focused on trying to be liked and friendly, that it paralyzes her from being a good leader. So that's extremes.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're going to do is take a quick break. When we come back, I want to dig into that a little bit deeper because I think we've got two polar opposites of possible leaders out there that have to contend with this likability thing. One is what you just described, someone who focuses so much on likability instead of being a good leader.
Yep.
And then I want to talk a little bit about the people out there that are just not naturally likable people.
Oh, my God.
But yet could still be good leaders and what they may want to try to do to be seen as better leaders in that area. So let's talk about those kind of two dynamics when we get back from the break here. You're listening to Leadership GPS with Alan Jackson and Tony Jackson, both from the Jackson Group, and we'll be back in just a moment.
This episode is brought to you by the Jackson Group, a consulting and survey services firm working with organizations for over 35 years. The Jackson Group helps clients gauge, understand, and help improve employee and customer satisfaction, as well as market perception and community awareness using a wide variety of survey methodologies. For more information about the Jackson Group, please visit their website at www.thejacksongroup.com.
Welcome back to Leadership GPS. We're talking about the other L word besides leadership. We're talking about likability. Talking about the idea of what it means to be a likable leader and is it even necessary. I'm Alan Jackson, again with Tony Jackson, my father, talking about leadership and likability today.
Yep.
And before we get back into our conversation, just a reminder to everybody, you're listening to Leadership GPS on themesh.tv. Themesh.tv is our online podcast network. We've got, we've got over a dozen shows going on a regular basis, all available through iTunes or through our website, which is themesh.tv. You can go online, listen to back episodes, download, subscribe. You can use iTunes to do that. You can go through Windows Phone media players. You can go through Stitcher Radio and listen to it. A lot of different options there. Just go to themesh.tv. You'll see all the information about the network. And you can even go back and listen to old episodes of any show, but in particular here with Leadership GPS, go back and listen to some of the conversations we've had over the past couple years about leadership in general. Some great varied topics. Hopefully it'll be something that would be helpful to you to download and listen to. So Dad, coming back to our conversation about likability, before the break, we talked a little bit about a scenario you had where someone was maybe going a little overboard on the likability side of things.
Yep.
They're trying too hard to be liked to the detriment of being a leader.
Yep.
And I've got plenty of examples of people I've known like that as well, where they think it's more important for their employees to like them and appreciate the way they handle things as opposed to just being a good, solid leader. Yeah. Flies a little bit in the face of what you were talking about with the realness and the relevance and making and kind of giving people direction on things sometimes if you try to be too friendly,
Yep.
it could actually be a detriment there. So
Yeah, and the signs when you can spot that in a person are pretty clear. I mean, we've all seen them. It's a person who prefaces requests being made of staff around them with an apology.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to have to ask you to do this, but if you can't do this, it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. I can try to do it if you don't have time.
They're not good at passing the negative messages down from the organization to staff. I know we want to talk about that in the future. I think that'd be a great episode, in fact.
Yes.
But, how does a good, effective leader support decisions or changes that are being made to their staff with which they don't personally agree? Mm-hmm. A person who focuses too much on their likability with staff doesn't do that well. They apologize for it. They say, I don't know why they're having you do this.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Don't look to me. It's them. I'm just a messenger. And
we'll do our best to get through this.
That's right. And they'll overextend it. They'll do all the niceties of the parties and the favors and the things like that. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But they do it to curry favor with people.
Yeah.
Look how nice I was to you. I had a person the other day that she is as sour as she can be, and she's not a likable person, but she's in a management role. And she just was incredulous. She said, Tony, I'm doing everything I can to get them to like me. And I said, well, like what? And she said, I bought a cake the other day, and with my own money. Mm-hmm. And I spent $23 on that cake. And not a single person said, thank you. I'm never going to get them a cake again. Just like, so she was off track. Yeah. But, these people are easy to spot. Okay. Yeah. So that's one extreme.
So what can we tell those people, if you feel like maybe you're listening to this podcast right now and you're maybe thinking to yourself, okay, maybe I do a little bit of that. I've actually heard myself say those phrases that Tony just recited. I'm sorry, but if you have time, I'd really appreciate it type of thing. Mm-hmm.
Being apologetic about being a leader.
Right. What should they try to do? What's some things that maybe they can walk away with to try to just be aware of that they're doing and how it could be impacting their leadership capabilities?
Yeah. Well, and I think that falls in two categories, because what you're really talking about is not changing a personality. You're displaying a personality type a different way. Mm-hmm. Okay. Because we're after the same thing.
Sure.
The good person who goes to extremes wants to be liked because they think that's a way to be a better leader. What we know is likability doesn't hurt your capacity to be a good leader. In fact, it probably helps it. Mm-hmm. Okay? Can do no harm.
Yes.
So between there, you're not trying to change who the person is. They're just trying to display the right behaviors more consistently that may lead to that likability, whatever it may be. Right?
So we're not talking about at all that people should stop trying to be likable, because obviously there is some value to there. It doesn't hurt the process, but you've got to have something to back it up, and you've got to have the right leadership things behind it.
And I think what you need to do is pave the groundwork. You need to do the right behaviors. Some things are, you might say, gimmicky. That's fine. But you know what? I mean, it goes back to, I guess, if I had encapsulated, Alan, the right formula for being a likable but effective leader, a likably effective leader. Maybe that's the right term. Okay,
likably effective leader. Okay,
how do you pronounce that? L-E-L. Lel? I don't know. Whatever.
You and the acronyms.
I know.
You got to always throw an acronym in there.
That's because I can't remember longer words. I'm that age, just like your mother now. Okay, so. Let me talk about some of those behaviors that a person could employ, whether they're gimmicky or not, doesn't matter at this point. But they can be encapsulated under this thing called PAVER, which is the acronym that I use about being a good leader. It means positive, being positive in things, positivism. Accessibility, people can get to you without fear, okay? They can find you.
Right.
Visibility, which simply means that person's in tune with me. That's the empathetic thing. They're out here seeing what we do.
Sure.
All right? The enthusiastic, that's the E, enthusiasm. As you recall, I've always tried to tell you guys, my sons and daughters, that that's one daughter. That's right. I only have one.
You only have one daughter.
One daughter and two sons.
Unless there's others I'm not aware of.
I'm not aware. I do get a lot of Father's Day cards, but that's a different story.
We don't want to check in.
That's right. Okay. But one thing I've always tried to tell y'all, if I have one thing to leave to you guys, I want it to be my enthusiasm, because I don't think anything great has ever been accomplished. And some of them may be much better than I ever said this, but most good things happen because somebody's enthusiastic about it.
True.
All right. Yeah. So that's the E part. But the R part is responsive. All right. Taking care of things, stepping up to the plate, doing what we say we're going to do. That's authentic as well. What you see is what you get. Now, PAVER is the positivism, accessibility, visibility, enthusiasm, and responsiveness. Okay.
Right.
I'll come back and give you some specific behaviors of how to do those in a moment.
All right. So let's go back to the example of the person who is focused so much on the friendliness and the outward display of likability, but maybe isn't carrying through with everything else behind the scenes possibly. When you read out that acronym, the PAVER, the only thing I see out of that it seems like that kind of example person is doing is possibly they're visible.
Yeah.
And maybe they're showing some level of enthusiasm to some degree, but it's kind of a misguided enthusiasm. It's not enthusiasm
gooey enthusiasm.
It's not enthusiasm for the mission or goals of the organization. It's more, I want to make you guys happy. I want to be your friend type of thing.
Yeah, they're a cheerleader of that likability factor. You know.
But employees see right through that. I think after a while, or at least they get so used to it that they start to take advantage of it.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of situations where you've got that really, really friendly boss who will bend over backwards for you and bring in the cakes and all this stuff and be apologetic for any time they ask you to do something.
Yep.
Those are the ones that really get trampled in the long run because employees just get used to thinking, well, gosh, if this person brings another project to my table, I'm going to kind of sigh a little bit and act like it's a little overloading to me. And that manager is going to say, oh, okay, well, never mind. I'll take it off your plate or I'll get somebody else to do it. So they can kind of help control their own destiny with that job. And I think that, I think those are the ones that get taken advantage of pretty
People
regularly.
can spot phoniness. There's no doubt about it. And I'm thinking of right now a person who is in a high profile position in an organization who is more focused on looking good to everybody, and yet the way he comes across is so phony that when you speak to him and he's like, yeah, I understand. Good to see you. He could care less. Yeah. And you know that. It's almost like that bank teller smile,
Right.
Thank you. Have a nice day. And when they say, get out of here, and the smile goes away once you're out of there. That's real integrity, Alan. What comes through with people is integrity of the person. And that's part of that factor about being real that we talked about. The integrity that stands behind you, your own likability and guarantees that it's authentic. Real integrity is doing the right thing, what somebody once said, doing the right thing, but knowing that nobody's going to know whether you did it or not. It doesn't stop you from doing the right thing.
That's right.
Yeah. You don't care who gets the credit, in other words, right? So it's one of those things where if we try to employ a lot of techniques and skills, but do it ingenuously, it's going to be spotted.
I tend to look at in a phrase I always like to remind myself is kind of playing for the long game. There's ways to get instant gratification on things. There's ways to get that feedback from your employees that they appreciated the cake you brought in, or they appreciated you letting them leave early to go home, or whatever it may be. Those are nice little short-term, quick little fixes. Yep. But you got to be playing for the long game. The long game is you're showing integrity. You're showing all the background, all the backbone behind that leadership, besides just the friendliness. So that 20 years from now, somebody can look back at that experience working for you and say, not only were they somebody I liked, but they really helped move us forward. And they really challenged us. They really got us on board with this project or mission or whatever it may be. Yep. And it's not the kind of things you're going to see day to day all the time. And sometimes you are doing the things that nobody else is going to see that you're doing. But I think you got to have that longer game in mind as far as what you're trying to do as a leader, even if it means on certain days you're not the most friendly or most likable person in the world.
Or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. True. But, somewhere that image of you about having that likability factor has to be established. It has to be established. It can't be a surprise to people because that's when they become suspect of it.
So if you just all of a sudden flip a switch and all of a sudden you're Mr. Nice Guy, joking all the time.
Grab a hand and all that. Like, what's going on? Why is he doing that? Yeah.
Well, then let's flip to the other example I wanted to ask about. Let's say you're someone that is just not someone people would call a friendly or likable person.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
But you are a very effective strategist and you're good with planning and project and managing resources and you know how to instruct people and delegate things. But you're just not likable. By your definition, you're saying that person can still be a good leader. They may not be the most effective leader in the world because they don't have that likability factor. It may be harder for people to buy into what they're trying to do.
They're probably better at managing than leading.
And that's back to our discussion. I know we had an episode about the distinction between managing and leading. It sounds like this would be a good manager. But if this is someone who's to be in a leadership position and is not terribly likable, is there anything they can do, or are they completely just out of leadership role opportunities?
Like they just weren't there when God gave out likability factors. Right?
I mean, what do they do?
No, there's some things they can do.
Okay.
They need to develop certain patterns in terms of their behaviors that people find predictable about you. Okay. I can count on him to do such and such. I know he's going to speak truthfully, honestly with us, and so on and so forth.
All right.
Despite how they feel about the message he's sending, or that he's got to send that message because of something he's trying to make happen. Okay, it's the way a person comes across. It's what we're talking about.
Right.
You can't be offensive to people in that. For example, way back in time, I sat in and observed a department head meeting, management meeting, led by a vice president organization, senior vice president. There's probably 80, 90 people in the room. You know, I mean, a sloped auditorium, very, very staid, fixed auditorium setup. And this was a time that the senior leadership had the time to dialogue with their directors and managers to help them then carry out the mission of the organization. But it really was down on communication, okay? And it was all, you people, this type of thing, you know, what you got to do, I expect this, and so on and so forth. There was no engagement of people in that at all. It was giving orders. Well, lo and behold, this one that I sat in, somebody was late coming to the meeting, okay? And it happened to be a manager of social work services in this organization. Very nice lady.
Sure.
Very nice lady, but also polished and effective person. She came in late. She happened to be tied up with a client. Came in late, slipped in, sat down. Later, because she was a vocal person, she raised her hand to ask a question or something the senior vice president was saying.
Sure.
And he right then said to her, you know what, if you'd come into the meetings on time, you'd know not to ask stupid questions. It's already been answered.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Now,
his likability scale just went through the roof.
You
at that
kidding me?
point,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Everybody said, yeah, way to
Yay,
go.
awesome.
No, what he did was beat up the person without even knowing it. You know, she told me after the meeting, I said, gee, that was kind of hard to hear. And she said, I'll never speak up in this meeting again. Just like that. What she was really saying is, I don't appreciate him very much at all.
Yeah.
All right. I find it hard for a person to follow willingly towards a better outcome and better goal, better productivity level than anything else. A person who is not at least some degree of likability, which I said before. So how do you do this thing? What kind of patterns of behaviors? Well, I mean, they're very simple, and it's not all inclusive, but these are some that come to mind.
Sure.
The first thing is you do have to come across as a competent person that knows what they're talking about to your folks.
Okay.
If you're out there and everybody said, what the heck? He doesn't know what he's talking about. Likability goes down as well.
Okay.
Because
So
it's hard to
even-
like a dumb person.
So even if you're the nicest guy in the world, if you're not showing some degree of competency in your job,
That's
and at
right.
least letting you people know that you are knowledgeable in this area and you know what you're doing.
People gravitate towards competency.
Okay.
Competency, all right? And because that builds confidence from them to them.
Okay.
All right?
Got it.
All right, so that's kind of what it's all about. All right? It's about competency and performance first, but then the other things, one of the things I find to be a very endearing trait of likable leaders, likable, effective leaders, the LELs again, is they admit fallibility, personal fallibility.
Yep.
They admit when they blew it. They
can see
have
that.
no qualms about saying, gee, guys, you're right. I didn't see it that way. I'm sorry, thanks for that input. Or, boy, I blew that, You're right. I did say that, and I spoke too soon. I didn't. Admitting fallibility in a healthy way is not beating up yourself in front of others and flagellating yourself in front of others. What it is simply doing is simply saying, I'm human too.
And, people are so afraid to admit those mistakes, especially in leadership roles. But you're right. I mean, when I hear somebody say, I missed that one, that one did not go as I expected, and I'm sorry, or that was my mistake, and, we're going to work to rectify it, and I'll take the lead on it.
Yeah.
That to me shows so much more of not only the likability, but just respect in general for somebody, even though our natural reaction is to think that if we admit a mistake, we all of a sudden get knocked down on respect level. And that's not the case.
Yeah.
Now, somebody who's messing up every single time they go out and do something, okay, that starts to probably chip away at it. But, those people who can admit those mistakes, I think that's extremely important. And I can see how that would affect likability right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't watch Survivor, do you?
You're kidding me? No.
Oh, you don't?
Oh, I don't watch any reality show.
I only watch
anything
one.
but reality.
I only watch one, and that is Survivor, because
Yeah,
I think Survivor is more of a really interesting organizational development experiment than anything else. But even just last night, I'm going to relate this to you on the mistakes thing. So we have a character on one of the tribes named Philip, and those of you listening to Survivor know exactly what I'm talking about. So Philip is very pompous. He's very arrogant. He's I know what's going to happen. I know what's best. I know what's going to happen here. And they get into their challenges, and he's the one saying, I'm going to do this. You guys go do this part. I'm going to take on this part because I'm the most athletic, so I can handle it. And last night they went through a challenge, and spoiler for any of you who are recording it and haven't watched it yet, but they lost their challenge. Philip lost for the team. And it was mainly because of his performance. He really dropped the ball on it. They get back to the camp. He doesn't say one iota about, hey guys, I'm sorry. That was my mistake. I really misjudged it.
Yeah.
He made all these other excuses and just kind of glossed over it and moved on. And you saw the rest of the tribe completely not only the likability kept going down for him, but the lack of trust and respect for him as well.
Yep.
So it's there again. If somebody had come back to that camp and said, "Guys, I misjudged that. That was really my bad. I'm sorry," I think the respect level would have stayed reasonably high, at that point.
I think you're right.
So it's just an example. I had to relate it to popular culture somehow for you.
He would have still been the person that the rest of the team would have said, well, he can get us through this. He can get us through this next challenge or whatever, even though they don't like the guy. But what would have made him more real and more likable if he did blow it and then came back and said, gosh, guys, it's on my shoulders.
That's right.
That was on me.
I've often seen in this show, and there again, I do watch it to see how organizations and teams function. I noticed that the people who do come up and admit their mistakes and admit that they really did not perform well in a challenge very rarely get voted off the tribe. Mm-hmm. It's the ones who mess up and don't admit it or don't, take accountability for it. Normally get booted off pretty quick.
Well, again, it's isolating themselves from everybody else rather than being a part of. They're apart from, and they station themselves
so
like that.
I do think that's a good note on likability there. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me speak to that other behavior trait that somebody who knows that they're not the most likable person, their behaviors are not the most likable. And let's put it that way. What we typically don't like are people's behaviors.
Yep.
All right?
Mm-hmm, sure.
Rather than them as a person. Mm-hmm. But because I think there's good in everybody, likable things in everybody, but the behaviors they display are just not likable. Mm-hmm. Okay? Not even tolerable in some cases. But one of the ways that you have to bridge that gap and build the likability factor for an effective leader who is effective in either way is since leadership is always about people, you have to focus on the other person rather than yourself. Okay. Mm-hmm. And this is a communications thing. It's a competency thing. How can I use that person to be successful in this? And how can I bring that person along? Even when you're in conversation with a person, asking the person a lot more questions, getting to where they're coming from, understanding that helps that authenticity, but also that insight into the person, that relevance about where they are. Okay. So you can speak to that empathetic view by asking questions of the person. Well, tell me more about that. Oh, really? What happened then? Man, that must have been a great feeling. Good for you. All those are focusing on you types of things and dialogue. Okay. You cannot lose by doing that as long as it's getting you the information you want and you need, but it's also at the same time building up that factor amongst them that, gee, he really thinks highly of me. Yeah. And I like somebody that thinks highly of me.
Sure.
That's what happens. Okay.
Okay.
That can happen. The other thing, still related to communications, I think the effective, likable leader is the person who can use with ease a lot of the personalized language in things. And they use the feeling type of language in dialogue with people. Okay. Well, how'd that make you feel? What did that bring out you? Oh, my gosh, really? Yeah, well, I can see that. And willing to say that I'm in a bad mood today, and I'm sorry about that, but this is kind of where I am. This is what happened. That candor, openness, and the personalized language all fit together. I would much rather know that a person I can believe out front what a person is telling me. That's a likable person to me because of their style of communication. I can believe them without having to try to figure out what are they getting at. Right. Why is that going? That's not trusting. All right.
Yep, absolutely.
And if I'm having to read too much between the lines and dig too much out, and I say, "What's wrong with you?" And then they say, "Oh, nothing at all. Just whatever." But they're short and curt and so on and so forth. It leads me to just questions more than anything else.
Absolutely.
I like a person that is open and candid with me. Okay.
So what I'm hearing so far, Dad, is, and I'm trying to give some hope to those people out there that are either in leadership roles or expected to be leaders or maybe hoping to be a leader one day, but are just not the most outgoing, cheery, smile on their face, bouncing off the wall type of person. Okay. Trying to give them some glimmer of hope. And the things you've mentioned, I think, are things that they can grab onto. Yep. It sounds like to me that even if a guy is not the one that's great sense of humor and chatty with everybody and smile on his face all the time. Yep. If that person, though, can be direct, honest, have good candid feedback or dialogue with their employees, and just not put up a front, but be as direct and honest as possible on things.
And admit their fallibility.
On things. So that's a part of honesty as well. That true honesty with people. They've got a good shot at being a really good, strong leader, even if they don't have those what we typically see as likeness, likability, outward factors.
But those things that you mentioned are factors that contribute to an image of a person as likable.
Sure.
People don't find them offensive because there's nothing to be offended by about the person. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And it may be likability is just tolerance. and nothing getting in the way, you know?
But in order for employees to tolerate you, you still got to make sure you've got that honesty and that directness and that empathy and candor on things. If you don't have those, then you're leading yourself to a lot of questions about trust and confusion, and people can't read you and all those other things. And then if you're not a likable person to begin with, that's kind of a recipe for disaster.
Right.
So
let me give you one other factor that I think can contribute to the effective, likable leader.
Okay.
And again, the likable part doesn't have to be in there in order to be effective in all situations, but it sure makes the road getting there much easier. All right. Humor, a sense of humor. You know, being around somebody who's direly sour or negative or so focused that they miss the humor in a situation is no fun to be around.
True.
Okay. Now, being humorous doesn't mean that you're always cracking a joke. You know, let me tell you what I say there. Yeah, blah, 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 blah. No, doesn't mean going out to have a beer with somebody and just yucking it up all the time. Humorous means taking a lighter view of things that could be seen as serious by others. Okay. There's humor in just about everything.
All right.
I'll give you a good example. I'm working with a person who has a very demonstrative, intrusive style of communicating with her colleagues, other director in this organization. So much so that they tune her out the minute she opens her mouth.
Wow.
And they will literally say that. Well, I stopped listening to her a long time ago. And in fact, in meeting with this person the other day, the person that is loud and profane and everything else, she said, they stopped listening to me before I even start talking. Before they even come to the room. I said, you know this? She said, yeah. I said, doesn't that bother you? Not really, because I'm going to say what I want to say anyway. And she will interrupt people. She'll overtalk people. And she'll talk loudly in front of people and just bear down. And everybody says that about her. And even when I talk about to another director in that another part of that organization, and I say, you know, there's a person I'm working with who does these types of things and all that. And she said, I bet I knew who that is because we got somebody we have to deal with like that. I said, really? So what do you do when you're around them? I said, I just tune them out.
Wow.
You know, they're not easy to listen to. They're not, you know. Well, my counsel to this person that is loud and abrasive and intrusive in her communications with colleagues, not staff or anything else, even though she sees her behaviors as being candid, open, factual, to the point, all right, and energetic in her communications. All positive things to her.
Sure.
Everybody else see them as intrusive, loud, you know, exclusive of others, you know, interruptive and those types of things, all negative things.
Right.
So they don't like her way of communicating, even though she thinks, you know, I'm doing fine with it. So here's the thing. I told her the other day, and she said, okay, so what do I do with that? How can I break that? I said, well, don't go in and just all of a sudden be syrupy sweet and nice about everything and all that. I said, do be polished enough to not interrupt. That's just rude.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
And if you don't overtalk somebody, when they're talking, you're talking at the same time, don't do that. And so you raise your tone of voice and you win. Don't do that. Stop. So 2 things not to do. But other than that, don't try to go in and be just syrupy sweet and not speak your mind and be candid. So what you have to do is make a little bit of humor about it. Go in there and preface your mind. Said, you guys know what you're going to hear from me. You know I'm going to be against this. You know,
okay.
And I'm not going to disappoint you. So here I am.
That does put a little bit of a different spin on the conversation.
Puts a little bit of takes the edge off.
Takes the edge off.
That's exactly what it is. Because it's simple. Said, I know how you're viewing me.
Yeah.
And I'm going to play to that. You know.
Well, I think too. I think playing to what may be your own faults and even kind of having a little bit of a sense of humor about it or framing the situation like that is great. Another thing for me with sense of humor is I know every time people hear that, they think that they've got to go out and start rehearsing jokes and memorizing punchlines. And it's not that. You're right. It's when something that could be humorous or lighthearted happens in the workplace, enjoy it, revel in it, comment on it.
Yep.
Instead of glossing it over and immediately running on to the next bullet point because you don't want to address it.
Or dealing with something that's disproportionately negative or disastrous, because it's not typically.
Right,
you know?
Sure. Right. And it's okay to have that lighter touch to it and have a little more fun with it. Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
So I think the person who struggles with the likability factor may be effective in other ways, but doesn't have that likability factor developed in themselves.
Right.
Can do each of those 5 things with some regularity. Find humor in situations, bring the levity to appropriately to a situation. Tell the truth. You know, one of the best speakers and most meaningful speakers I ever heard one time was a president, CEO of a company. He got up in front of a banquet for long service employees. And after all this big fanfare of introduction, he simply said to them, look, the best thing I can say to you today is tell the truth. When you're talking to people, tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
He said, lies you have to remember. The truth you can forget. All right? That's a good point. That's right. It's always going to be the same.
Yeah.
So tell the truth is first. Secondly is be focused on the other person in your dialogue a lot of times, okay? Because people like that. They like to talk about themselves. They like to talk about how they feel about things. Now, there's being open and candid, but also personal in your communication. That candor, openness, knowing where people are coming from is a likable factor. So, and then listening to the other person. Admit fallibility, right? And as we said, find the humor in situations.
Right. So those are all things that somebody can do, even if they're not the most outgoing personality. They're not what you would typically think is a very high likable person.
Yep. And they're not changing their personality.
That's true.
They're just displaying themselves, displaying another side of themselves.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing.
So what we've kind of summed up here is that likability does have an impact on leadership. Yeah. And even though it's not the most important aspect of leadership, it is something that can definitely help improve a leader's position. And we feel like, it would be very, very hard for a leader to be effective without some level of likability from their staff and
That's
team.
my position, yeah. And again, it's not the determinant factor of profitability, about total effective leadership or reaching goals. Its presence or not presence doesn't determine whether that's done or not. Mm-hmm. But I tell you what, having the likability factor in there, you have to jump through less hurdles as a leader to get people to follow you.
Yep. Okay.
If you're a likable type of person.
That's a good way of summing it up. So it does help clear the path a little bit for you on getting some things done.
That's
good point. Yep. All right. So there is hope out there, even if you don't see yourself as a very extremely likable person for whatever reason. And those of you that are maybe going overboard on the likability, let's rein it back and let's focus on what's really important here. Telling the truth, candor, having direct dialogue with somebody and relating to them and being responsive and personal to them, and having a little bit of a light touch on things when appropriate, are all things that can be done without having to go sugary sweet and buying cakes and throwing parties every week. So good.
Absolutely.
So likability. So we're saying there is a connection with leadership. Hopefully this gave some good ideas and advice to people out there looking to work on their own likability or at least evaluate where they may be on that.
But you know what? Also to acknowledge there's probably tons of people listening out there to this podcast that disagree with this.
Sure.
And we'd love to hear from those folks. Drop us a line, pick up the phone call.
I was going to say, there's a lot of articles out there saying, I've read both the ones that say likability shouldn't be anything in a factor with leadership. I've heard others say that it's everything to do with leadership. And I think we're playing somewhere in the middle. We think it's important, it's not the most important aspect, but it is a good element to have to pave the way for getting things done.
Yeah, as Dwight Eisenhower once said. He said, leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it.
And I think that would be hard to do if they didn't like you.
That's exactly right.
Okay,
that's exactly
great.
Right.
Dad, thanks so much for all your input and time today. We appreciate it as always.
I've enjoyed it, son.
Yeah.
You did a great job.
So Leadership GPS, this is our show. We put out an episode as often as we can, talking about different leadership aspects. Again, you can visit themesh.tv to view all of our back episodes. You can play any of those you like. They're all free to download, free to play. And we'd love to hear your feedback. There is a contact us form on the website. We welcome you to use. Drop us a note if you've got a question, you've got some feedback on the topic today, anything else, we'd love to hear from you on that area. A couple of websites for you as well. The Jackson Group is the company that we both are associated with. thejacksongroup.com. That is a company where we conduct satisfaction and engagement surveys for a lot of different organizations, employee, customer, patient satisfaction surveys. And we also do some consulting on those outcomes as well. And then we've got Drive Leadership, which is our leadership development program that Tony's our lead consultant on, working with organizations, much like what he's been talking about through this show, working with individuals on helping develop those leadership skills and helping them grow with the organization.
And it is an individualized approach that we use in Drive Leadership, working with the leaders, but taking where they are, where they want to go and the organization wants to be as a leader, but understands that people learn in different ways.
Sure.
And they're at different points of competency in their leadership skills. So meet people where they are, help them get to where they want to be and the organization wants to be.
Great.
That's it. Yeah.
All right.
A couple of things about some future sessions maybe that we're going to talk about.
Absolutely.
I know two of them right away stand out to me.
I'm
that we
taking
want to
notes.
do.
Yep.
One of which is that bugaboo all the time, like we mentioned briefly during our podcast, that what about if you're a leader of a group, a good, even effective, likable leader, but you're charged with announcing and then implementing unpopular things to your staff with which you personally disagree.
Absolutely.
All right. There's an art to that. Okay. And I think it's one worth bringing up and talking about.
I think that sounds like a good topic there. Absolutely.
There's another thing too, and I know we're going to do an interview with a good friend of ours, but also a good leader in his own right. He's a major in the Army. Mm-hmm. Scott Coffey. He's out in Kentucky right now and served several tours overseas, a great American and a good leader who listens to our podcast all the time.
Yes,
and
hi, Scott.
Yes, hi, Scott. Major Scott. But I'm going to promote him to like general.
Okay, sure. Right. Yeah. For our show, he's general. So.
But he does share our podcast with his troops.
Oh, great. Good.
His command staff Very there. Nice. But anyway, Scott talked to us one time. He said, I'd like to be interviewed and talk with you about toxic leadership.
Ooh.
Yeah. The bad side, the dark side, the venomous side of leadership sometimes, and what the trademarks are when you have a toxic leader.
Okay? Oh, I think that'd be interesting. Yeah. That's a couple of good topics we can definitely sort of try to address there.
Okay.
So, all right. Well, stay tuned for those topics and many more in the future months as we keep plowing ahead on this show. Thanks again. We welcome your feedback, and we'll look forward to talking to you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.